I think, especially in our little bubble of experimental performing arts, you have to be ready to be given like, just a spool of string and like a chair. And you're like, that's what you got. Make something good.
When was the last time you were playing a video game and thought, this is unlike anything I've experienced before and will likely ever experience again? For me, that once-in-a-lifetime gaming moment resulted from 1000xRESIST, a thrilling sci-fi adventure that quickly became my game of the year in 2024 and is still quite possibly my all-time favorite narrative-driven game. And yes, I know I've already gushed about it on a couple of occasions, but it's been over a year, so cut me some slack. Anyway, I remember having a painfully beautiful, beautifully painful conversation with my favorite purple clone sister, marveling at the impeccable writing, voice acting, and soundtrack, and thinking, who made this game, and why haven't I heard of them before? I navigated to the About page on the developer's website, and suddenly, it all made sense. For those of you who aren't familiar, Sunset Visitor is an independent studio based in Vancouver. The team consists primarily of Asian Canadian diaspora creators with backgrounds in dance, theater, music, film, visual arts, and new media arts. For me, discovering that information immediately explained why 1000xRESIST felt like a game in a category all its own. How could it not, being shaped by so many modes of creative expression outside of the video game industry? So, what exactly is it like for a group of performing artists to get together and make a game? To find out, I'm joined by composer, new media artist, and founder of Sunset Visitor, Remy Siu. Remy, please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your professional background.
Yeah, my name is Remy Siu. I'm the creative director and founder of Sunset Visitor. Before I founded the studio, I used to work in the arts, specifically like experimental theater and new media arts. And that really kind of informed a lot of the work that we did on 1000xRESIST and also what we continue to do at the studio.
Sunset Visitor's mission statement is to tell diverse stories through the lens of speculative fiction. What drew you to the speculative fiction genre in particular?
A lot of it actually, I think, comes back down to being able to tell specific types of lies that you get to tell in speculative fiction. I guess to a degree, like, you could say that so much fiction is speculative fiction, but, when we're dealing with something like science fiction or magical realism, those kinds of genres, it does allow you to tell a kind of lie that may be truly unbelievable, but have it kind of work well in that context.
As we mentioned earlier, 1000xRESIST is Sunset Visitor's debut game, and prior to forming the studio, a lot of the team was working in the experimental performing arts. Please tell us more about your personal background in the arts and what made you decide to start making games.
So my personal background in the arts, I think, started with writing when I was younger, writing fiction, being interested in that, and then kind of not knowing what to do with that and not really wanting to study that in school for whatever reason. I don't know. Hard to remember. I guess I went to study music, and I also lucked out there because I got to go to a school called SFU Contemporary Arts here in Vancouver that allowed you to become a composer, or they were interested in making composers, even for people who didn't have a lot of musical background. They were just interested in people who wanted to make sound. And so I went into that program and got lucky again because I realized that it was kind of a very multidisciplinary school with the theater and the dance and the film and music. They're all very close together. At the time we were in these portables. we were just in one big portable together. We since moved to a different campus, which was the third time I got lucky during that whole situation, because then we got a bunch of new facilities. And so there was that kind of explosion of energy amongst myself and my peers, and we all started to work together, stay at school late together, kind of make weird things. So that kind of is what got me into eventually sitting in on a lot of devised theater classes and then starting to work with devised theater people and dancers as a composer. At that time, when I thought about composition, I was thinking about writing notes on a piece of paper. But then when people are in studio and they're moving around and they're improvising whatever they're doing, it's hard to keep up that way. You obviously can't be sitting there writing anything. And so that was when I got really into live electronics. Some of the stuff like Ableton was still quite new, I think, at the time. So I was using Ableton, I was using Max MSP to try and keep up with the theater people.
Yeah, I went to a liberal arts college. Theater people have so much energy.
Yeah, they were just going. And so I would do things like mic them in strange ways and then feed their sound signals through the computer. So it was like some live voice manipulation, stuff like this. And so did that for a while and got to practice that, and then realized that, in the device theater spirit, you want to have everything in the room with you. That's why it was great to be able to do sound in the room along with the creation, so things could be made with sound in mind. But then when it came to the lights, we didn't really have access to that. What would happen is that at the end of that creation process, we would go into a theater and there would be a tech period where people would set the lights up. And we were always like, oh, that's weird. That's the only thing that we don't do in the studio. We have to wait until the end. And then usually the lights are a little bit more disconnected from the creation of the work. It's not a part of the work itself. It's just stuff that's added on afterwards. So I think that's when I got into trying to control lights with my computer, and then also control projection and stuff like that. Kind of got into doing that along with the music stuff, and then that just kind of kept rolling for a long time. Kind of got more and more sophisticated over the years, but got to control both sound and light from my MacBook and be able to kind of define the milieu of whatever was going on stage that way, and improvise it even sometimes. From the projection aspect of it, there was a angle of creative coding involved, doing kind of procedural graphics for stage and working with sensors and stuff like this, gyroscopes and what have you, whatever you could get data from. So that turned into working into Unity at one point. I don't know how. Game engines are great at rendering 3D things real time. Eventually I was like, oh, I love games. I've been wanting to make games since I was young, and that's how it started. And then yeah, it went all the way up to the pandemic when it was just working in Unity was the only thing left I could do.
I believe I've seen you mention that you brought in some people specifically to work on the coding aspect of the game, since the rest of the team primarily had more of an arts background. What was it like for those two groups of people to mesh in the studio?
Oh, yeah. So our programmer, Nicole, was the one that moved from Montreal to Vancouver to work on the game. And also, Kodai was coming from VFX and more animation stuff. It's actually an interesting, culture clash that we continue to think about, as we do other things. One side has worked in an office for, a majority of their adult life. And the other side is, as you said, can't sit still. And not only can they cannot sit still, it's sometimes it's hard to think about one thing for longer than a couple of months. A rehearsal process in the performing arts may be anywhere from a 2-week workshop to a 3-week kind of rehearsal, then putting it up on its feet. Often our lives in the arts were very fractured. It was 2 weeks here on this, 2 weeks here on that, 2 weeks here on this, go travel here to do that, go here to do this. So being in one place and working, consistently for 3 years is a very different experience than what some of the arts people were used to. But at the same time, I also think maybe from the office side of things, I think they probably just thought we were a little bit wild sometimes. I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, you've basically got people from two opposite disciplines coming together to produce some third thing.
Yeah, and I would say that what's kind of nice is that, where it does connect is that I think device theater and video game development, or iterative kind of indie development, does have a lot of crossover. In studio, if we were making some work, we would be all right, let's, by the end of the week, let's try to put something up on its feet. Or even by the end of today, let's have a couple of vignettes that we can perform for ourselves and see what it's like. And that's very much, in a lot of indie games, it's very quick iterative prototypes of trying to get something up on its feet really quickly. And it's also cyclical in nature. There's lots of crossover things where it didn't feel totally different.
Yeah, that makes sense. I imagine that's also part of the reason you decided to write the game in an episodic fashion, so that you could focus on one smaller piece at a time.
Yeah, I think if we zoomed in and tried to be hey, this is how it's going to go at all. We do always try at the beginning, just so that we get our brains going, but at every point The moment we start to do something in the engine, or we start to really put some conversations that will stick together, it changes so quickly. It just immediately is like, oh, well, this new thing is emerging, right? And we really like when it starts to emerge, we can like grab it and follow it. You just can't account for those things beyond that, that they'll happen. So that was our desire to like also to react to ourselves, like if we did this in one chapter, how can we be playful with it in another chapter?
Do you remember any specific examples of something that surprised you, or a way that the initial plan for the game started to change in a way that you decided to carry through?
The very first one was that we had never considered that Watcher would betray Fixer in chapter 1.
What? Really?
Yeah, no, that was not planned. So we were just like...
really surprising.
because it's like the, like the emotional driver for Watcher for like the rest of the game in so many ways.
Yeah, that guilt feels so central to her character.
To a degree, it's kind of like the inciting incident of the game in many ways. The drafts that we were going through just didn't feel right until it was like she turns her in. I'm like, oh yeah, now it feels good. And then it gets to be fun because that's like a generative change where you're like, oh, well, what if in the next chapter, Fixer gets burned alive? Would that be cool?
So cool.
And so like stuff like this where it's like, you commit to something that feels like it has potential to like, you can keep riffing on it in a way that's fun. So that's one. And then, for example, we had never considered that Jiao would appear after like chapter 1.
That is crazy.
Yeah. So like when we put Jiao in chapter 2, we were like, oh, it'd be fun if Jiao had a cameo, and then she just kept having cameos. We were just, let's just bring Jiao back one more time. Let's bring, and to the point where it like became a joke in chapter 6 and onward that we brought all the Jiaos back. We brought more Jiaos than you can handle. So stuff like this is always like kind of being playful with what has come before. At the break of every chapter, it felt always quite freeing. You're like, oh yeah, that chapter is done. Now we can take a different approach in the next chapter.
We've touched on this a bit already, but what are some other skills or ways of thinking that you cultivated in the performing arts space that you were then able to apply to 1000xRESIST?
I think, especially in our little bubble of experimental performing arts, you have to be ready to be given like, just a spool of string and like a chair. And you're like, that's what you got. Make something good.
Wait, that's so specific. It sounds like you've actually been given a chair and a spool of string.
It was maybe not a string and a chair. I'm just like, definitely like, here's a room. Make something in this room. And you kind of like learn to work with very little. And Pinky says this all the time, like some of the music training really help with this because it's just a lot of it is like abstract. Maybe you have a couple things and you're like, moving them around. And that's something I think was really good experience to have. Because in Unity, or in games, like sometimes it's like you could meet a situation where you don't have a lot. How can you spin a scene so that you can actually achieve it? And then usually that creates constraints. Either it's constraint that you have or one that you eventually create for yourself. And then working against it usually is helpful to kind of get a sense of what can come out in this condition.
Definitely. Having to work around those sort of limitations, whether they're technical restrictions, limited personnel, budget, whatever the case may be, I feel like that's often what forces people to get the most creative, and the results are often better, or at least more interesting than what they would have been without those constraints in place.
Yeah, you can actually think, you're like, oh yeah, I can think now. At least that's how it's for me.
What aspects of 1000xRESIST would you say best showcase this sort of creative mindset?
3 and 4 are pretty good examples in the sense of there's very few things you're doing. Or just taking that one constraint and like trying to push it as far as you can, which was like the kind of proscenium 2.5D communion where you learn about youngest. And in chapter 4, it's like a strange communication thing when you're occupant. I remember being like, how are we doing this exactly, So it's really like leading with affect. It's like we didn't have a place for where it could happen. At some point we were like, okay, well, maybe it could be like a cave because it's like ancient or like, primordial or something like this. And that's really where some of our background is helpful because it's like the cave itself is not like a super impressive structure, right? This whole level is just about light and darkness. How can we make that feel really distinct? And then, of course, all the tableaus and messed up stuff you see when you're like in the cave itself, right? It just becomes a black box essentially. So then it's just black box theater or black sphere, I suppose. It was like a sphere, black cavern. So then you could start putting in anything to try to communicate what's going on. There's like that one where you enter the room and there's school desks everywhere. That one was like squeezing something out of nothing, maybe.
There's also just a lot of very literal spotlights being used in those chapters, if I'm remembering correctly. Or all throughout the game, I guess.
So much of our work before, it's just like spotlights in dark spaces, right? In particular, like projection light, which is kind of how we like modeled the spotlight that we use in the game a lot. It's very sharp. The edges of it are not darkened or anything or softened. It's trying to emulate like a projector casting a shape in like a foggy space or something.
All right, lastly, and this is probably going to be a bit of a tricky one. What would you say is the most important thing you learned over the course of becoming a game developer and making 1000xRESIST?
I learned too many things. Sometimes I felt like my brain was melting through my ears or something. I was just like, oh my God, I just can't. There's so many things I'm learning. After having made it and also kind of talking to other devs about their development experience and all of this stuff, I think it's clear to me that nobody knows how to make games. In the sense that, like, you know, the problem of games as a like production thing is very unsolved and very open and changes game by game. And I think that's good. And I think if like the world, or I don't know, the species learns how to make games, then I think we will have stopped making interesting games. It very much is in sync with device theater. Every time you're going to make a device theater work, you don't really know how you're going to make it. The piece changes, the people in it change, the materials that you're working with change, the space itself and where you're doing it changes, and the context changes. And so those are so many variables. And then, you know, you have to like generate the work in the studio with your peers. You have strategies, but like in terms of how you may make it, you really don't know. And every time you're just like, oh my God, I can't believe it. Yet again, I've decided to do this thing and I don't know how to do it. You sit a lot sometimes in the unknown but I think that's good because otherwise it would be boring. Yeah.
Thank you, Remy, for sharing your creative insight, and thank you for watching this episode of Storycraft. What games do you count among your favorite works of art? Let us know in the comments below.